central banks have inflation targets, right? So they want to set a target of like 2%. So your money is supposed to be worth less, by 2% every year. And that's their goal. Their goal is to make it worth less every single year. Yeah. So like right now, inflation's a little too high. It's like 3.5 right now in the US. It was at 9 last year. That's really too high. But they want it to be about 2%.
Why?
And the reason is that if it isn't, well, there's lots of reasons, like complicated reasons. But one of the big reasons is this issue that you just described, which is hoarding. Why would you buy something today when you could defer buying it a year to when your money is worth more, to when that thing costs less, right? And so what happens when you have deflation, the opposite of inflation, is that people hoard money. And that means less buying of goods and services. And goods and services are what employ people and what create growth in the economy.
Swear to if you feel inclined to, but it's a shit show now with all the transit
well, with the
construction.
Transit construction. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But Alex Tapscott, welcome to the Gents Talk podcast.
Welcome.
Happy to be here.
Well, I'm super excited to have this conversation. He has no idea what we're really jumping into.
I'm excited because I like learning stuff.
Yeah, right on.
It's going to be a lot of information.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have in front of us here a book called Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier. What does that mean? Let's just start right there.
Sure. Well, the choice of the subtitle and the title of the book is quite intentional. When you write a book, you get to choose your own title and subtitle, which is always nice. I think that Web3 represents a new frontier for the web. And I think, like a lot of frontiers, it's got its fair share of risks and opportunities. But unlike the frontiers of the past, it's not bound by geography. It's not limited by natural resources. The frontier online is really an infinite frontier. And I think it's going to be quite transformational for culture and for business as well.
Okay. So let's maybe start with the pure basics here. Because there's going to be a lot of people that have heard of crypto, heard of Web3, heard of blockchain, all of these things. Definitely heard of NFTs with all the craze that happened around it last year. But let's maybe start with what's Web 1, what's Web 2, what's Web 3, what's blockchain. Maybe let's get those out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, every once in a while a new technology emerges that transforms the economic power grid and the old order of human affairs in ways that are oftentimes quite profound and quite unexpected too. And we've seen this play out time and again throughout history, whether it's with the internet or the TV or the computer or the printing press. And right now we're in this really interesting moment where there's not one new technology, but 4, all basically emerging at the same time. And each of these different technologies has the potential, in my opinion, to be as disruptive as anything that's come before. So the first of these technologies is a thing called blockchain, right? Blockchain is not exactly a sonorous word. It doesn't really roll off the tongue.
No, yeah.
And unfortunately, in this industry, there are a few words that are a bit clunky. But blockchain, nevertheless, is an important innovation. Blockchains enable us to move value over the internet, peer-to-peer, without the need for an intermediary. So the first use case for a blockchain was a thing called Bitcoin. I'm guessing that a lot of people who listen to this podcast have heard of this thing called Bitcoin.
You've heard of that at least.
It's that thing that's used by drug dealers and criminals to move money around.
Yeah.
For all the hoopla and all the value it's created, Bitcoin's got a market cap of $800 billion. Bitcoin was designed to do something really, really simple. It was designed to enable individuals to move money online without a middleman. And what was really remarkable about Bitcoin was that it actually worked. There had been previous attempts to try and create money for the web. Mark Andreessen, the creator of the web browser, tried to add money into Netscape, into Mosaic. Later on, Elon Musk, someone who's done a lot of brilliant stuff, tried to make a digital money project before morphing into PayPal. The original X.com was actually designed to be digital money. But what all of those innovators could not figure out was a thing called the double spend problem. How do you ensure that when you move something of value online, that you don't still retain a copy, right? So if you think about the internet today, like if I send you an email and attach something to it, I can send the same email to someone else. I can, in fact, send it to 1 million people. And so in a way, like the web, the first era of the web is sort of like a printing press for information, which is great when it comes to information, but not so great when it comes to assets. So Bitcoin was the first use case of a thing called a blockchain. Blockchain is basically a new operating system that allows people to move value peer-to-peer and to prove digital scarcity online, right? And so it works for Bitcoin, but it can work for basically anything in the economy that requires scarcity. Money, stocks and bonds, titles and deeds, IP, art, collectibles, even votes in an election. Because if you think about a vote is a lot like a transaction. If I vote, it's important I can't vote again, right?
Sure, yeah.
And that I can also see that my vote was cast and that it was counted for the person who I voted for. It's a lot like sending money or making a transaction. So blockchains enable us to move value peer-to-peer. That's number one, technology. The second big technology is AI. AI is allowing us to fully reimagine what we thought computers could do, but also what people could do when empowered with these tools. And I think it's going to create huge leaps in productivity, but it could also lead to all sorts of cultural and social upheaval as well. Now, the third technology is extended reality. So virtual reality and augmented reality. For 30 years, we've had a two-dimensional internet, right? You see it on a screen, whether it's a desktop or a laptop or a smartphone. And what extended reality promises is to take our internet and turn it into a spatial web, integrated into our natural world. And the fourth technology is IoT, the Internet of Things. I'm not just talking about, smart thermostats. I'm talking about devices that can think and do transactions. So all of these technologies are not separate, but related. In the same way that the term internet went from describing a very narrow set of like networking technologies to describing a whole range of technologies, business models, social behaviors, cultural phenomena, the term Web3 is coming to describe a new era where these different technologies converge, with blockchains underpinning all of it.
Wow.
That is a lot. That is a lot.
So where does...
And I'm happy to dig in
yeah.
and tease out a lot of the little details of all that if you'd like.
Yeah. Just more the Web3. Like what is Web3?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Web3 is a term, as I just said, that I think helps to sort of describe the new era that we're going. But I think it's helpful in order to understand Web3 to define Web 1 and Web 2, right?
Yeah.
So Web 1, what technologists call the read web, but what I think a lot of people just remember as the .com era, was basically a medium for the presentation of static information on websites, right? So medium, static information, websites. You logged on, you guys look like you're like roughly my age. So, you probably remember like the 90s.
Yeah, dial up.
Going on the internet,
stuff, yeah.
You type a URL into a URL field and information slowly loads onto the screen. Images, text, That was about it, right? And, it was pretty primitive by today's standards. You couldn't interact with that information. We weren't really uploading our own content. You weren't using the web as a way to find community. It was really like a broadcast medium. It was sort of one directional, not totally unlike TV or radio or film, right? But it did something very, very important, which is that Web 1 democratized access to information. So it didn't matter if you were, a guy in Toronto or a student in the Philippines. If you had access to a computer and to the internet, which was a big if, at the time, only 30 million people had access. But still, if you had access, everyone around the world could access the same information. And that was revolutionary. In the 2000s, a couple of big technology changes occurred, notably the invention of the cell phone and the smartphone, that led to a new era of the web, what's now called Web 2. In computer jargon, it's known as the read-write web. And basically what that means is now the web was not just a way to access content and information, but it was a platform that allowed you, the user, to upload your own stuff, right? Everyone could be a citizen photo blogger, citizen journalist. You could share your opinions and blogs on Flickr. You could write things into Wikipedia. Those were the early examples, right? But later on, social media, I think, became the big business model of Web 2. And Web 2 created a lot of value in the economy. I mean, it created literally $10 trillion of market cap in the hands of a bunch of big companies, right? But it also onboarded tons of people to the internet. And it also gave everybody a way to share their own thoughts, right? So you can kind of think of it this way. If Web 1 democratized access to information, Web 2 democratized access to publishing. So everyone now could be a publisher, right? Before that, it was very difficult. You write a letter to the newspaper and hope that someone puts it in the newspaper. But other than that, you had no way of broadcasting to the world. Mm-hmm. But Web 2 came with some pretty big costs as well. And the biggest one was that all of this data and information that we created as internet users was very valuable, but we didn't own it and we didn't control it. It was owned and controlled by platforms, by financial intermediaries, and so on and so forth. And that was problematic because it meant we couldn't manage our privacy, but also we missed out on whatever the economic opportunity was there, right? Yeah. Like the killer business model of Web 2 was advertising. Yep. Even today, like Facebook is an advertising company, $1 trillion advertising company. And all that's built on a mountain of user data. And the problem with Web 2 is that we had no way of expressing ownership online, ownership of our data, of our identities, of our digital creations, of our assets, and so forth. So enter Web 3, the read, write, own web. So now the web is not just a way to access content or to publish information, but it is a new platform that allows us to own our own identities, own our own data, own our own digital creations, and be able to move value and assets peer-to-peer without the need for powerful platforms and intermediaries. So they say technology makes the world a flatter place. You maybe heard that. The world is flat, right? Thomas Friedman. Well, if that's true, then I think Web 3 is going to be a steamroller. Like it's going to flatten the world in ways we've never experienced before because it's going to give everybody around the world a way to move and store value and to potentially build wealth and earn money in a manner that was just simply not possible before.
By the sounds of it, it also allows people in underserved pockets of the world to access financial instruments that they otherwise may not have been able to. That's
true, and that's supported by the data as well. There's a great company called Chainalysis that does an annual survey to look at the penetration of blockchain and tokens and digital assets. And they found, like in their ranking of the 10 countries that have the most adoption, that other than the US and Ukraine, all of them are pretty much in what you call like the global south, right? Mm-hmm. India, the Philippines, Venezuela, Nigeria, etc. And in a way, it's very logical because oftentimes in those kinds of places, people don't have as much access to financial services. The local financial industry could be corrupt or not serve their needs, or the local currency itself might be hyperinflationary and might not be a good store of value. Now, I'm not making the investment case for Bitcoin because what's happened with blockchain is that there are all sorts of other ways that people can move and store value that don't include Bitcoin, including with the US dollar. So I'll give you an example, like in Nigeria, the usage of a stable coin, which is basically a token backed by US dollars, is the higher there than it is in the United States, for example.
In terms of usage?
In terms of usage, percentage of people who use that. Mm-hmm. And the reason is it's a lot better to store value in US dollars than it is in the local currency, the Naira, which usually has inflation of around 3% per month, right? So we get worried about 3% per year in places like Canada. And young people who are digitally native or used to using technology might have access to a smartphone connected to the internet, but not a bank account. So how are they going to use how are they going to move and store money? How are they going to use this technology? So what's so interesting is that within Web 3, one of the sort of most exciting frontiers of innovation is actually happening in these different kinds of countries, which I think it is an inversion of how we think about technology progressing. Usually we think it's like early adopters in Silicon Valley and Toronto and wherever who are, picking up and using these technologies. That's not untrue, but what we're seeing in the aggregate is that people in developing nations are more willing to adopt this technology than almost anywhere else in the world.
Why would somebody want to trust digital money over money printed by the government, let's say?
Well, that's a philosophical question that we may not have time to answer on this.
It just sounds like we're going to have to do multiple
in this conversation. Bitcoin's a lot like digital gold. A lot of people think gold is a useful store of value, and a lot of people don't. And it's really a matter of opinion. Gold's got a 10,000-year track record that Bitcoin doesn't have. But then again, so did horses. Right? And today we still own horses, but they're a novelty. They're not the way we get around.
Right.
So what's interesting about Bitcoin is that, it's a store of value. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It's easy to prove ownership. It so far has done pretty well since its inception. And it's also very useful as a medium of exchange where gold is not. It's hard to pay for stuff with gold, right?
Yeah, you're not walking around with a
well,
brick.
Well, you'd have to shave it
chisel
into tiny little slivers, right? Whereas Bitcoin is like any other piece of software. It's infinitely divisible. So you can pay down to like a tenth of a penny in Bitcoin or all the way up to $100 million if you want. But that's really a philosophical question. I happen to own Bitcoin. Lots of other people do. It's maybe not for everyone. But what's really interesting about blockchain and Web3 is that what makes Bitcoin possible can work for any other kind of asset. And this, I think, is a good way to sort of start a conversation about cryptocurrencies, right? So I think that the term cryptocurrency is just a bad term.
Well, it scares a lot of people off.
Well, it scares a lot of people because the word crypto sounds like Tales from the Crypto or something.
Right, yeah.
But also, it's actually just a misnomer. Most of the digital assets in the world aren't trying to be currencies, right? They're trying to be something else. A currency is something very specific. By definition, a currency is a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. So US dollars are currency. Canadian dollars are a currency. Bitcoin is trying to be a currency, but it's probably not all the way there. So it's a store of value? Yes. Is it a medium of exchange? Some people use it for that. So yes. Is it a unit of account? Not really. That means basically, do we price stuff in Bitcoin? Like if you go to the grocery store, you buy a car or a house or something. It doesn't say this car is 2 Bitcoins. Right. It's 50 grand or whatever, right? So we don't use it as a unit of account quite in the same way. But what's important about digital assets, or tokens as I call them, is that most of them are not trying to be currencies at all. The best way to think about a token is basically as a container for value, right? So in the same way a shipping container, you've seen like those standard shipping containers. Yep. You see them on ships, you see them on trucks. They're the same shape, right? But inside of the container, you can put just about anything that can fit into the container. You can put a car, you put furniture, clothing, food, computer parts, bicycles, whatever, right? It's sort of a empty vessel to put stuff of value. So a token is kind of like a container, but instead of containing physical goods, it can contain assets. So it can contain money, stocks and bonds, right? Financial assets. It can contain IP, creative works, votes, like as I said earlier. Anything that requires scarcity to have value can be programmed into a token. So a token can represent a share of Apple, right? I'm going to sell you the share of Apple. It's important when I sell you it that I can't sell the same one to someone else, right?
Right.
Because otherwise the share becomes worthless.
So how do you protect against not being able to... If you came to me and said, I'm going to sell you that share of Apple, for example, how do I know, as the person who's going to exchange something of value for that share, that you're not going to turn around and sell the exact same thing to Matthew? Because
I can't. That's the benefit of a blockchain. So we'll do a level set on blockchain. So traditionally in transactions, you have a middleman, right? Like a bank sits in the center. Unless you're moving money peer-to-peer using cash, there's some sort of company that sits in the center. Right. And companies like banks and brokerages and other intermediaries maintain a ledger of transactions. And the ledger basically says who owns what, who owes what to whom, and so forth. And for maintaining this ledger, for acting as a trusted middleman, those companies get compensated, in some cases quite nicely, right? Mm-hmm. Banks make a lot of money by acting as trusted middlemen. So blockchain is basically a ledger. It is a record of transactions, except instead of sitting inside of one company who we have to trust to maintain that ledger, this ledger exists on every computer that's connected to the network. And everyone can see what's in the ledger, but no single person or entity can alter that ledger. The only way that you can add any information to this ledger is if the entire network reaches consensus. So the way it works with a blockchain is that transactions are happening all the time, and periodically those things are batched together into a thing called a block. That block is then broadcast to the network, where stakeholders on the network basically collaborate together to figure out if the transactions are valid. If I sent you that money, did you really receive it? Do I not still have it? If I sold you that asset, do you have it, and do I not have it? And once the network has reached consensus that those transactions are valid, they are batched together and added to a chain of blocks that goes back all the way to the beginning of time. Now, if you wanted to alter that record, you would have to not just move a number in a spreadsheet. You'd actually have to rewrite the whole history of commerce, going all the way back to the beginning of that chain. And you'd have to do it within a matter of seconds or minutes, because soon thereafter a new block would get added, and then you'd have to start the process all over again. Right? So it's a kind of a technical thing, like, I'm not going to lie. But what it does is it replaces trust in a middleman with trust that's distributed across a network. And in so doing, gives us a way to move value peer-to-peer. Because if I've sold you that share and that transaction gets added to a block and goes into the chain, then you can point to that exact thing and say, see, that's where the value moved from one account to another, from one address, as we call it, to another address. And that blockchain is available to anyone. And you can search it, and you can dig into the details, and you can know with 100% certainty that I can't sell the same asset twice or send the same thing twice. And that's how blockchains solve that double spend problem that for decades vexed computer scientists and really smart people. And what's so fascinating is that it worked, right? It worked for Bitcoin. And by working for Bitcoin, allowed us to imagine how it could be used for basically every asset in the economy.
How can blockchain tech be used in our everyday lives? Like, how is that next frontier going to happen?
Yeah, well, it's already being used by at least a couple 100 million people in the world primarily as a medium of exchange, as a financial asset. And mostly that's actually through the use of stable coins, not Bitcoin. So stable coins are basically tokens, but inside of the container is a dollar, a US dollar. And those dollars are held inside of a bank somewhere, usually in the United States, right? And so what a stable coin is basically like, think of like Interac or Venmo, but for the world and with no dollar limit. So like if you have family that lives in some country, you can send them $1,000 in 1 second and it costs no money, right? Today that's like a superpower for a lot of people because the average fees,
especially on the receiving end.
No kidding. I mean, remittances, like, so we're in Toronto, right? Ontario, the province where we live, is the biggest net remitter per capita in the world. So what that means basically is that like we're a city of immigrants and we have all these diasporas that live here and they're all sending money often, not always, but often sending money home to their families. And that number is like $30 billion per year out of Ontario alone.
Wow.
Right? That's like $200 for every man, woman, and child in this country or in the province. Those people on average are paying 7 to 10% to send the money to family living overseas. So with a stable coin, you can do that transaction in a matter of seconds and have it cost less than 1%, basically. So that's an example of Web3 in action as a financial tool. Another really interesting area is in the area of culture, right? So you mentioned NFTs in your introduction. Now, NFTs, I think, kind of get a bad rap.
They're not just photos.
Well, JPEGs on blockchain, JPEGs on a chain or whatever, right? Yeah, like there have been some high-profile NFT projects where the price ran up a lot and where people probably got suckered into buying something and lost a lot of money. That's undeniable.
And I think ultimately anything crypto-related, anything in this space, people should be treating in the same way they treat the stock market and anything else.
I would argue probably more caution, honestly. Right. I mean, like this is an investment advice, but like what's a safer bet? Like buying shares in Apple or buying shares in some random NFT, right? Like we know which one's riskier just by their very nature. But what's also true about NFTs is that there have been at least 300 NFT projects that have created $1 million of secondary royalty revenue for their original creator. So let's say you're a visual artist, right? And you paint like a traditional medium. And you're a starving artist and you're just getting going. You just graduated from OCAD and you sell your first painting to someone for $500. And you're like, thank God, I finally sold something, right? And then let's say you hit it big and you become a real star. And then someone goes and sells that piece for $50,000. Do you participate in the difference, the upside?
No, you're not getting anything from
I don't
that.
think so.
Yeah.
Right? Some galleries try to enforce that, but in general, you don't get anything. Right? But so if you're a digital artist and you create things in a digital medium, and lots of people make art on their computers, right? It's not just with paintbrushes. You can sell your art as an NFT. And when that asset is sold again, because it's a piece of software, you can program it to automatically pay you. And if it's sold again, pay you again. And sold again, pay you again. Just a little bit, but it's like a royalty for music, right? Or any other kind of asset. So there have been 300 NFT projects that have created at least $1 million of secondary revenue for their creator, right? Not just the original sale of the JPEG or whatever, but a form of royalty. So to me, that's something that is really profound. And something that we can apply to like lots of different other creative fields. One of the things that I'm quite excited about is how Web3 can help address some of these challenges that AI has created for creators, right? So everyone's worried that AI will be used to write scripts and to do visual effects and to do other kinds of creative work. I mean, maybe we'll just have digital twins of people and put their face on an avatar, and then we'll never have to hire actors again, right?
Well, isn't that part of what the actors
strike was about?
Yeah,
exactly right.
Concerned about that very thing, where their likeness would be used by AI in some capacity, where at some point you're just not even going to need the human anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
The background actors was a lot about.
Those are the most, right?
I think the concern is like, let's say you're starting out in Hollywood, and you're like get hired as an extra for $100, and then they give you a boilerplate agreement, and then the fine print of the boilerplate agreement is that you hand over your likeness in perpetuity. That's the kind of thing that
I think they make a star out of you.
Yeah, and then they make a star out of your face.
Yeah, you get nothing for it.
And you get nothing for it.
Yeah.
So, look, the actors and the writers, they went on strike and they won some really important concessions from the studios. So they can't do that legally. And I think that, collective bargaining and the courts are important tools for creators to make sure that their rights are protected. But technology can also be part of the solution, right? So one of the big concerns with AI is that IP that belongs to a creator, let's say, like Sarah Silverman, the comedian, she's someone who's already sued OpenAI. And lots of other creators are really pissed off about this because they're like, listen, I can ask ChatGPT to write a script for a sitcom in the style of Sarah Silverman, and the outcome is a script in the style of Sarah Silverman. Where are they getting the content from? They've obviously consumed every single stand-up routine, everything she's ever written, etc., and digested it and turned it into this script. And where's the compensation? Where's the attribution? Where's the fair use of that content? And that's a big concern, right? So right now, AI models are closed, right? They're opaque. They use a whole bunch of data that we don't always know where it's coming from.
Yep. And
we know that these things are creating a lot of money, right? Like the pro tier for ChatGPT is $30 a month. The company's going to make at least $1 billion this year, and probably like hundreds of billions over the coming decades.
As more and more people start to adopt it.
Honestly, it'll probably...
And they just released, too, the idea of being able to create your own GPT.
I know.
Which is, I think, interesting, exciting, concerning. Like, it just all mashed up into one where you can start creating your own GPTs that'll just do things for you.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm not an AI doomer. Like, I think AI is fascinating. I think it's great. But I think in order for it to reach its potential, one of the things we need to figure out is how to ensure that the data that's going in is accurate, and that if someone owns it, that they're fairly compensated for it. I think that shouldn't be controversial.
I think it's fair.
Yeah, exactly.
At the minimum, yeah.
And so in the same way that, NFT projects have created secondary royalty revenue, we can tokenize IP, and so that every time it is used by a model, it can create an attribution to the creator and make a payment, right?
So does that then assume... Okay, so how would that work in Sarah Silverman's case? If she goes out and she puts out a comedy skit,
Yeah.
how does she make that an NFT? How does she turn that and go, okay, whatever is pulled from this comedy skit is now going to pay me back a royalty if it's ever reused in some capacity?
It's a great question. And I think a lot of that implementation is stuff that still needs to occur.
Okay.
But I think that, it's not just that an NFT, I think people think of as a piece of visual art, right? Some image that's unique from another image. Mm-hmm. But every piece of IP, most IP, I should say, is unique from the next piece of IP, right? So that skit is different from the stand-up routine, which is different from something else. And so you can have the data, so the script itself, and then you can think of the NFT as basically, instead of the asset itself, like the artist's signature, right? It's the thing that authenticates it. So, it would still, in this system, there's no silver bullet, right? But in this system, you would have to have the model provider agree to pay the creator. It's not like they could use it in the end. If some skits on YouTube, they can consume that information and not pay the creator, right? But this is assuming that there's some legal regime that now allows us to put something like this in place, right? And the whole idea is that creators, if their content is getting used, should get paid instantly when it's creates something of value.
Yeah.
It shouldn't require us to comb through legal agreements and wait months for payments to come through in the mail or something like that.
You have to go and chase it down and everything. Yeah.
I think like anything in life, technology is not a silver bullet, but if you combine this with collective bargaining, with laws around fair use, you can create a system that works for creators.
My question is, you're talking about Bitcoin and you can't buy, let's say, a car for 2 Bitcoin.
Well, you can.
You can buy a car
if
for
the person on the receiving end wants to.
It's more
receive
just
it
that we
way.
don't think of it as being priced. People don't mentally think of things as being priced in Bitcoin.
Well, I can't go to, let's say I can't go to McDonald's and get a burger for Bitcoin.
I don't know if you'd want to make that trade.
Well, so in that sense, because a lot of people think, what could I even buy with this Bitcoin? Is why would I have it? It's like I have this Bitcoin, but I can't really buy anything with it. Is it?
Well, lots of things are very valuable that can't be used as a medium of exchange, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't go to McDonald's and buy a hamburger with shares of Microsoft, but that doesn't mean that shares of Microsoft aren't valuable, or gold bars, or your house, or a car. That's is an asset fungible? Is the word, right? Can it be easily used to buy something else, right? And that's why I think Bitcoin hasn't not achieved currency status, because we don't think of it in that way. But that doesn't mean it's not valuable for other reasons, right? In the same way that we might have lots of reasons why you'd want to own shares in some company or own gold or whatever it might be.
So Bitcoin itself is finite.
Yes.
So there are individuals out there who will say, I would never sell my Bitcoin. I would hold on to my Bitcoin. I wouldn't trade it for anything because it's finite. It can't be reproduced, which I'll ask you to dive into in a moment.
Sure.
But it can't be reproduced. So therefore, why would I be dumb enough to go and trade it for anything that's not going to be I go and I buy a hamburger with X amount of Bitcoin. 5-10 years from now, that same X amount of Bitcoin could be worth 5, 6, 7 times worth them, right?
Yeah.
So why would I do that? So
it's a good question.
And it's sort of quest to become a currency. The people who seem to understand it the most also would not even use it as a currency. So how could it actually play a dual role?
Well, that's why I'm skeptical, frankly, that it ever will be a currency in that sense, that it ever will be used widely as a way to buy goods and services. I'm just skeptical for that exact reason. Central banks have inflation targets, right? So they want to set a target of 2%. So your money is supposed to be worth less, by 2% every year. And that's their goal. Their goal is to make it worth less every
Really?
single year. Yeah. So like right now, inflation's a little too high. It's like 3.5 right now in the U.S. It was at 9 last year. That's really too high. But they want it to be about 2%.
Why?
And the reason is that if it isn't, well, there's lots of reasons, like complicated reasons. But one of the big reasons is this issue that you just described, which is hoarding. Why would you buy something today when you could defer buying it a year to when your money is worth more, to when that thing costs less, right? And so what happens when you have deflation, the opposite of inflation, is that people hoard money. And that means less buying of goods and services. And goods and services are what employ people and what create growth in the economy, right? So this is like the classical economic sort of view, which is that you need just a little bit of inflation, just a tiny bit, because that way people won't hoard money, they'll spend it. What are they spending it on? They're spending it at restaurants, they're buying cars, they're going to Walmart. And what does that do? That creates jobs for waiters and cooks and for manufacturers and executives and everybody else, right? So this is like a theory of growth that says we have to have a little bit of inflation in the economy. Bitcoin is the opposite. I mean, over so far. Which is to say, since it began, it's just become more valuable over time. So, and that changes year to year. That can change a lot. Like right now, we're 50% or 40% below the all-time high in Bitcoin, right? But so far, in the long run, this is a thing that's become more valuable over time. So the logic is, okay, so let's say I've got, I want to buy a car. The car's $37,000, right? So one Bitcoin's $37,000. Let's say I use my one Bitcoin to buy it, Toyota Camry for $37,000. Next year, my Bitcoin's worth 50 grand, hypothetically. I just spent 50 grand on that Camry in my mind, right?
And it's also lost value.
and then the car is 25% less valuable than it was before. So that's why, anyway, so this is all to say, I love these conversations always come back to Bitcoin. It's such a beguiling and fascinating topic. But basically, I just think that like as a way to buy stuff, people won't use it because they believe it will become more valuable over time. And that's going to prevent it from being used as a medium of exchange. But that doesn't prevent tokens that represent other things of value to be used in that way. And that's why the thing that most people use today within this industry to move value isn't Bitcoin, it's US dollar stable coins. And just to put a number on that, the amount of volume of, or the value of all US dollar based tokens in the world is $130 billion US. And last year, one of those stable coins called USDC, basically it's issued by an American company, the money is held in US banks, it's all audited and verifiable. But that one asset did more dollar volume than the whole Visa network last year.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's because if you're going to move money, it's like, or pay for something, pay for goods and services, the receiver and the merchant probably wants something that they know isn't going to go up and down in value over time. Now, the US dollar does go up and down in value, but it goes up and down in value against itself, right? So people don't notice that its value is changing. They just see, I got $1 yesterday, it's $1 today, right? And so
what they're not seeing is the fact that that dollar yesterday
could be worth more or less, relative to other currencies, but also that its purchasing power could change because of inflation.
And I think the easiest way for those listening to think about this or watching is remember what it cost to buy a Big Mac combo at McDonald's a decade ago and what it costs today. Right? Like there's that same $10 that would have gotten you a combo now doesn't get you maybe the sandwich by itself.
I know this from personal experience because I just had McDonald's 3 hours ago.
Okay.
And I was in the airport in Chicago and I got a McMuffin, a large coffee, and the item comes with a hash brown, right? Like it's the combo.
That's the combo,
So that combo, I remember from my childhood being like $4 Canadian, and it was 10 US dollars, which is like 14 Canadian dollars. It's like, man, that's a lot of money for a McMuffin and a drip coffee, you know?
And people are seeing it now in the grocery stores. Like people are talking about
is so expensive.
How things are expensive, but
gas,
the amount of money that they have or that they're using, that same $10, that same $100 buys you much, much less.
Yeah, exactly.
So how does crypto or how does Bitcoin or any of these projects, how do they combat this problem that exists for the everyday person?
Well, I mean, it all depends on which project that we're talking about, right? A token that's backed by dollars doesn't seek to solve this problem. All it does is it seeks to create a better version of what exists today. A US dollar that you can send anyone anywhere in the world, and then anyone can store regardless if they have a bank account. That's a superpower. So that thing's not trying to solve any problem. Bitcoin has an inflation rate which declines over time, so that the amount of new Bitcoin that gets created slowly converges to zero. That won't happen for a while, but that is the path that it's on. Other tokens, as I said, aren't really concerned with the concept of inflation because they represent totally different kinds of things of value, right? Some tokens represent in-game assets, for example. So, people already spend tens of billions of dollars a year on virtual assets inside of gaming environments like Fortnite or Roblox and others. And in those kinds of environments, like they're spending the money, they're buying the asset, but they don't own the asset, right?
Once they turn off the game, it's gone.
Or once the game, let's say you want to take your Robux out of Roblox and use them at Starbucks or something, or like trade them for dollars. You can't do that. You're beholden to their rules. So what's one of the most exciting areas within Web3 is in Web3 gaming, where it's basically like if you're going to buy the asset, you might as well own it. You might as well have property rights to your digital goods, right? And so there are a lot of games that are emerging that make ownership part of the gameplay. And being an owner means that you can participate in the upside and also suffer the downside if the asset declines in value, right? I mentioned at the outset that I view Web3 as a convergence of different technologies, right? So blockchains are the thing that make digital assets possible. I talked about how AI can be supercharged by ownership. And then one of the other things that I mentioned was extended reality, virtual reality. So a lot of people are excited about this concept of a metaverse, right?
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but everyone seems to have their own definition of like, what is the metaverse? Like, what is the metaverse? I don't know.
There is no one set definition.
There is no one set definition. I think that probably when people talk about the metaverse, they're thinking of like a virtual reality headset that you put on, where you enter a virtual environment, some world or something, where you socialize, where you play games, and where you consume content. I think that's sort of the idea, right? You go into this world and you can be, you can be courtside at the Lakers game, and you can play games, and you can go to concerts and hang out, like something like that. And I think that's really cool, by the way. And I think the technology for creating immersive experiences will get there.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
We're not there yet. No. But I think that companies that are pushing this vision, like Facebook, have a very particular view of how this should work. Their view is you come into this environment, you play by our rules. Any data that you create, we own. You have no privacy. If you buy virtual goods, they stay inside of the environment. And if you want to sell them, you can only sell them to someone else in the game, and we're going to tax you. In Facebook's case, they've floated 50% tax for every time you sell a digital asset within their environment.
Wow. So it's a Web 2 company playing in the Web 3 space using Web 2 rules.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly how I describe it. It's taking the Web 2 model and putting it into a virtual world. And I think that's fine, I guess, right? It's to me like that's not some new exciting plane of human existence or whatever people talk about the metaverse. It's like a virtual Disneyland, right? And Disneyland is fun. So I hear. It's been a while. I was there. It was fun when I was 10. I don't know if it's still fun. I have 2 kids under the age of 5. All I know is it's very expensive these days. This is what I've heard.
Especially if you look at the cruise lines too.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
I've heard that just to have a good experience at Disneyland, it costs $20,000 for a family of 4.
Insane. I don't know who's spending
it's
that kind of money.
4,000 is the cheapest you can do it. Is 4,000, but then the high end is 40 grand. So the middle range there is $20,000. Anyway,
and that's US, by the way.
Oh yeah, 100%. So if we're trying to create, like, what's the reason the metaverse is exciting? Well, 10 years ago we spent an hour online per day, as people. If you weren't near your computer, you weren't checking your phone all the time. Today we spend 6 hours per day
Yeah.
online.
As my phone likes to remind me.
Honestly, like I'm like 8.5 personally. Like I look at I'm like,
You get those little notifications.
yeah.
and you're
It's
oh,
like
man.
you should reduce your screen time. It's like, congratulations, you've reduced your screen time from 8.5 to 8:15
Yeah.
this past week. Like, oh, great. Yeah, that's 15 minutes. What was I doing?
I just spent 10 minutes on the phone thinking about what I was doing. Yeah.
So we're spending more time using technology, right? And it's possible that the hardware that we use to access the web is going to change. And that's because that's kind of how it goes, right? So for 20 years, we had the desktop era, desktop and laptop era, right? And then we had the smartphone era. And, you know, the first iPhone 17 years ago, right? So maybe the hardware interface that we use to access the web is going to go through an upgrade. And maybe that's a headset or whatever. So if we're going to be spending more time and we're going to be in a more immersive world, that means like a bigger part of our culture, a bigger part of our wallet spend, and a bigger part of our sort of sense of self will be spent online, right? In the metaverse, whatever you want to call it. If that's true, then we need to create rules for that world that reflect the way the world works today. The good news is that we already have those things, right? So I say there needs to be like a constitution for the metaverse. And basically it has to involve really just three simple things. Number one is people should have a reasonable right to privacy. We have this in the real world, right?
Yeah.
This is enshrined in law in places like Canada, in the US. So you shouldn't be, all of your information and data shouldn't just belong to some company because you're using their virtual world.
Sure.
Number two is we need to have property rights, digital property rights. We have property rights in the real world. If you own a house, someone can't just expropriate it, right? You have a right to own that house. You have the title to that house. Online, until blockchains came along, we had no way of showing
Proof of ownership.
proof of ownership of digital assets, right? We have a way of showing proof of ownership of real assets in the real world. We had no way of showing proof of ownership of digital assets. Now we do, right? Tokens can contain anything of value. And we need to have economic freedom, which basically means if you own something and you want to sell it or take it with you, you should be free to do that, right? Like if you own a car and you move to Calgary, you can drive that car across the country and put it in a garage in Calgary, right? But in the metaverse, if you own a car, virtual asset inside of Fortnite, you can't move it to Roblox.
No.
Right? You're confined by the rules of those environments. So we need to have standards that allow people to move their assets between worlds. And so if we can get that stuff right, which by the way, we have lots of precedent in the real world, like this is how the world works already.
Sure.
Then we should be able to recreate it online. Right. And if we do that, then we'll fulfill a vision of the metaverse that, I think will work for everybody.
Do you foresee one standalone metaverse? Because you've got Facebook building out its version. You've got several other projects building out their versions.
Yeah.
At some point, as a consumer, I'm going to be sitting there going, from which one is which, like what's the main one to be a part of type of thing? Or do you foresee a scenario where it's just going to be several metaverses and pick your own adventure type of thing?
I have no idea.
Fair, yeah.
The word metaverse comes from a novel called Snow Crash. And in that novel, the metaverse is sort of a singular thing. And in a way, all the history of metaverses and virtual worlds are not always necessarily positive, right? Yeah. The most negative version of this would be like the Matrix, where you're plugged into a computer and you're living in a fantasy land, but really all your guts are being harvested to keep this evil machine alive, right?
We're not in the Matrix.
We're not. Well, I hope not.
Okay.
This is not the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah. You're not here to tell us.
I mean, we're in Canada. Pot is legal, so we could be having a whole other. We could be having a whole other kind of conversation here.
Maybe that's a series, right?
Yeah. But where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So, but right now that's not the way the world works. There isn't like a singular thing. Right now we've got a bunch of companies spending a ton of money trying to build virtual worlds where they can make money off of people, right? Facebook or Apple's Vision Pro. They don't call it a metaverse, but that version of extended reality is a new platform to make money, right?
Right.
In the same way, like the App Store is a platform, Vision Pro is a platform. So I don't really know how it's going to go. What I do know is that we're really a long way off on this one.
Time horizon.
Time horizon wise, I don't know what the answer is, but like realistically, you know, what is the world where you and I are wearing contact lenses or glasses, where this space that we're in right now is interwoven with the virtual world, and where we have access to, you know, where our experience is being enhanced by technology and all the things I'm talking about. It's more than 5 years down the road, I think.
Because there's a hardware component and a software component.
Yeah, like the Oculus. Have you ever used an Oculus headset?
Yeah.
That's like the Palm Pilot of headsets. In my opinion.
Makes me dizzy.
Yeah, it makes you. It's
That's
like
already on 4 though, is it not? Like the Quest 4.
the Quest 4. Yeah. Like it keeps getting better. It will get better. This is how these things work.
Right.
But what stage are we at? Like this is. I think the Oculus. I mean, if the Oculus Quest was really that great, more people would own them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
It's
there was
also
a
really
time
expensive too. It's also a price thing, I think, as
yeah,
well.
totally. Like there was a time in the 90s when, you know, business people in the tech world had Palm Pilots and stuff, and they were email devices, and they were really expensive, and they were pretty primitive. But for a small subset of the market, they were very useful and kind of fun, right? But it wasn't until the BlackBerry and then really the iPhone that the smartphone became like a ubiquitous tool that everybody used.
Everyone
right?
uses, yeah.
The
Meta Quest Pro, is that Apple's new one? That's coming
Vision
out?
Pro.
Vision Pro,
Yeah.
thank you. That's gonna cost what, like $4,000?
$4,000
US,
which sounds like a lot, but you know, like the first like, you know, Apple computers cost like $4,000 40 years ago.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's why they only
Like
saw them
$4,000
in like schools.
$4,000 is a lot of
and
money. Don't get
businesses.
me wrong,
Yeah.
but like what
But you're not gonna get adoption
What you're
for that.
getting for $4,000 is like a computer.
Oh yeah,
It's just like
the thing looks
mind
incredible.
blowing.
I'm really excited to try that.
But,
I really want to try it.
Yeah.
But technology also advances so much quicker. So it's
Yeah.
easy to, at this point, to think, okay, maybe 10 years down the road. But it's also I remember you were mentioning 17 years for the first iPhone. In my mind, that was 27, 30 years ago, because it just seems like Apple was around for so long.
Yeah.
But it really hasn't been that long. And even in those 17 years, it's grown so much. Even the last 7 years, like the phones have gotten so much better.
Yeah.
Right? So what do you think would be, maybe let's say Web 4? Like what would that be? What do you think that could be even like?
It'd be the wet web, the biological web. You know, that's like Neuralink.
Yeah.
You know, the technology in your body. No, I don't really know, but that is something that people talk about.
I think they're starting a human trial.
They
on-
are.
on
That would be
Neuralink.
like
It'd
the
have to
next
be a
the
Web
next
4,
frontier would be like, you know, when we become cyborgs. But like,
Yeah.
you know, I won't be writing a book about that.
You wouldn't have to.
No.
It'd just
No,
be
the book would
implanted
write
in-
itself.
right?
I mean, actually, I joke.
GPT.
I joke with people that like I got my book out at just the right moment, because I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure like most business books about business and technology will just be written by
GPT. Yeah.
It's like they'll be like the last human book about the web. I joke, but
Do you
not really.
okay? So do you think if you wrote this by hand, extensive hours, time
On a
spent
computer.
research
Yeah, I didn't-
on a computer?
not-
Sorry,
not
yeah.
like,
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
And then if I came up and said I also wrote a book, but I used ChatGPT to help me out.
Yeah.
I gave it the prompts. I told it what I wanted. I still read it, reread it, proofread it, did the whole work. But
Yeah.
I wasn't there doing the research because that's what I used GPT for. I used it like an assistant. Does that take away from the output? Would you look at that and go, that's not fair because of what you had to do to create your book? Or would you look at the product, the end product, and go, this should not even be considered because it was created a certain way?
I think fairness has got nothing to do with it. You know, I mean, I think if ChatGPT wrote a book that was better and more insightful and people preferred, then that is what it is, right? I mean, like that's the reality. What's unique about this book is that I've always found when talking about new technologies that it's more powerful to tell stories. And so what I did with this book and what I've done always is talk to a lot of people and interview a lot of people. You know, I talk in this book about a 10-year-old Filipino boy named Sevi, who's autistic. And as part of his therapy, he does art. and he was putting a lot of his art online on Facebook. His mom was posting pictures as a proud parent, and people started to sort of see this art and thought, oh, isn't that neat? Like this boy is doing painting, how cute. And his art was actually pretty good. Someone in the community in Manila, where she lives, told her about NFTs and said, have you ever thought of maybe selling this artwork? She said, no, I've never even heard of an NFT before.
Right. Yeah.
And she said, well, I don't want to sell it because Sevi likes to keep his art. And she said, no, you don't understand. You can sell a digital proof of this art, but keep the original. She's like, okay. So she minted a couple NFTs of his art. And all of a sudden, people started to buy it. And in the last 2 years, Sevi's been to New York, where he was on CNN. And his family's made $15,000 from the sale of NFTs of his artwork, which is enough to fund his autism treatment for the next 10 years. Right?
That's a lot of money for someone.
No kidding. That's more than the average Filipino family makes in an entire year. So it's stuff like that I think is really powerful. And you only get that by talking to other humans and like speaking to them and hearing their stories. And everything with a new technology also is relevant from within the last sort of 6 months to a year. And look, this is an implementation challenge of AI, but right now, most of these models are trained on data that's at least a year old, right? So you actually don't get the stuff that's from the last year. But I think the much more powerful part of it is being able to, tell stories and to hear from the people themselves, artists, creators, venture capitalists, business people. A friend of mine who is in the book, his name's Dixon Nsifer. He's a Nigerian-Canadian business person. His company helps companies that operate in Africa to repatriate dollars back to the U.S., and they use stable coins as a way to do it. But the more interesting part of that story is that he says the 100 employees that he's got in Nigeria, every single one of them is under the age of 30, and they would all rather make money in tokens than in the local currency. And that is a sign, in my opinion, of just like the deep cultural and economic change that's underway, right? I mean, like that poses a threat to central banks and governments if people stop using your local currency.
Sure.
And all that stuff's from conversations.
And I imagine, I don't know if we're going to have time for this rabbit hole, but I imagine that's why governments and banks, and you started at the very beginning with a comment about how crypto is generally used by criminals, and like I've heard that.
Well, that was a joke.
I know, but that's generally the
perception.
The perception, right? That's kind of the argument that's made for why we shouldn't trust it, and we should go with our trusted, currencies. But that's something that I think we definitely need a part 2 for.
There is a part 2 to that. There's a lot to unpack with that, right? So do criminals, like, think of traditional criminals like mobsters, terrorists, whatever. Do they use crypto assets? Yes. According to all the data, and remember, the blockchain is a transparent, immutable ledger that everyone can go and see. So you can do a lot of analysis of this. And the data says that they use it less frequently than they use cash or prepaid cards or other mediums of exchange because it's traceable. There's a record.
Right? You can
public
trace
record.
It, yeah.
So the criminals overall are less enthusiastic about using crypto assets to pay for criminal activity.
Right.
But there's another side of the story, which is that there are a lot of scams in the space, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a form of criminality, right? That's not someone using coins to, I don't know, do a murder for hire, some traditional mob crime or whatever. But scams themselves are a form of fraud. And it's something that I think about a lot, right? Because, it's a big problem in the industry. And the way that I think about it is that technology doesn't have like moral agency. It's not inherently good or bad. It's a tool, and it depends on how it's wielded. The first era of the internet, right, the Web 1 era, democratized access to information. But it also democratized access to disinformation, right? Web 2 democratized access to publishing. But it also democratized publishing of hate speech and other sort of incendiary content that maybe stokes violence or does something else. Web 3 democratizes access to ownership and gives people tools to form businesses and to launch new ventures. But it also makes it much easier to launch a new scam.
Sure. Right.
And so in a way, like, there's a duality to technology. where there's like a good side and then there's the bad side. It's in economics that's known as an externality, right? It's like if you're a an oil refinery and you make a product that you sell into the market, that's your profit. But the externality is all the sludge you put in the river, right? So the externality in Web3 is that it's become easier to launch online scams, and I think that's a big problem. Now the good news is that that's illegal. It's illegal under the law today. You don't need new laws to say it's illegal to fleece people out of their money, right? That stuff's illegal. So we need to, it's not a technology problem, it's an application of the law.
So it's how it's being
issue.
Used.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we need to reckon with as well.
Amazing. Alex, thank you so much.
That was great. Thanks.
We definitely have to do this again.
Yeah,
there's
I'd
a
love
lot
to. I have so much more to go into.
Yeah, I could tell you're just getting warmed up.
I know, I am just getting warmed up.
We definitely got to do this again.
Yeah.
So where can people find the book?
The book's available wherever books are sold.
Yeah.
Amazon, Indigo, Chapters, Barnes & Noble if you're listening in the U.S. The best way to buy the book is in massive volume. Christmas,
Buy 10 of them.
Hanukkah, it's right around the corner.
And amazing. And you're still on tour right now.
Yeah. I just finished up city number 12 on a 13-city book tour. So it's just in Chicago at the Booth School of Business. And I'm finishing up actually in Detroit in 2 weeks' time. We've been to LA, San Fran, DC, where we did an event at Capitol Hill, Boston, where we did at Harvard, Miami Beach. We've been everywhere. So
very nice.
Yeah.
Congrats on the book.
Collecting my frequent flyer miles.
So my last question, as someone who doesn't know much, after I read this, like what is, like in a sentence, something I would know?
Well, at the outset, you asked about the title, right? Yeah. And I said that this is a new frontier. And, some frontiers are for experts only, require vast amounts of capital or knowledge to overcome, whether it's climbing Mount Everest or venturing to the moon or something like that. But in my opinion, and history tells us this, the most bountiful of frontiers are the ones that are pushed by everyday people. So you don't need to be an expert to take an interest in this technology or to care about the future. But my hope is that even if you're planning on embarking on this new frontier or learning about it, that you'll use this book as a guide. So my hope is that you'll read this book and you'll get a better appreciation for how this set of technology is going to change business, what it's going to mean for cultural and cultural industries, for society, and maybe there'll be some things you can learn and apply to your own life, right? Maybe this is for you, but for everybody who's listening. Yeah. Maybe you're a student and you're interested in a career in one of these areas and you like to learn more. Maybe you're an executive at a company and you want to understand what it means for your business. Maybe you're a person who works in government and you want to know how you can attract capital or talent to your country or your location. Maybe you're a journalist who's got a negative view of a lot of this stuff. And this will help to reset the conversation or help you rethink some of these issues. So my hope is that it will help to spur a conversation and get people thinking about those things.
Amazing. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll do this again for sure.
Yeah, let's do it.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.